What I'd like to do this morning is to just share a little bit about NALEO, the organization that I've had the honor of leading now for 24 years, and talk about a very important issue that's affecting all of us, and that's getting ready for the 2020 census. And I know I don't want your eyes to gloss over because I'm going to be a nerd and talk about numbers, but you'll see that this is one of the most important moments in American history. So quickly, just talking about our organization, the National Association of Latino Elected and Appointed Officials. We're an organization of Latino political leaders and their supporters. You don't have to be Latino to be a member. You don't have to be an elected or appointed official to be a member. All you need is $100 to be a member. So I welcome all your memberships. Democracy is what NALEO is all about. And we have a tradition in our country that's founded in the Constitution that we need to count everybody. And it's coming up in 2020, it's every 10 years. And one of the things I always want to remind people when we do the census is that it is part of our form of government. It is written into the Constitution. It's how we established this republic. If you all remember from your history classes, and I don't take it for granted anymore that people know our own history. That when the 13 colonies decided to become the 13 states and form the United States, they needed to figure out how to govern themselves and how to form a federal government. And so they had a compromise where every state would get 2 senators, and then every state would get a number of members of Congress according to how many people they had. And so the only way to figure that out is that you got to count everybody. So every 10 years, the Constitution requires that everybody in the country be counted. Now, when the country was formed, not everybody was counted equally. If you remember our history, slaves, African-American slaves, were not considered to be full people. They were only 3/5 of a person. And if you were a Native American living on a reservation, you weren't counted at all. That was corrected by the 14th Amendment. And the Constitution today says that the representatives shall be apportioned among the several states according to their respective numbers, counting the whole number of persons in each state. It doesn't say the whole number of citizens, doesn't say the whole number of voters, doesn't say the whole number of men, doesn't say the whole number of property owners, doesn't say the whole number of adults. It says the whole number of persons. So the census is the only thing really that our government does in which each of us is absolutely equal. Doesn't matter if you're a DACA recipient, doesn't matter if you're a business owner, doesn't matter if you're homeless, doesn't matter if you're a millionaire, you only count as one if you get counted. And that's the challenge that we have coming into 2020. We want to make sure everybody gets counted. And when we talk about 58.9 million Latinos in the country, we want every single one of them to be counted. And why is that? Because of what's at stake in the census. The census is a form of representative government, right? It's about distributing political power among the states according to their numbers. It's about enforcing civil rights laws. The only way we know when a practice is discriminatory is if we have data to show if people are being treated differently. So we need to collect that information. Billions of dollars depend on the census. Every single year, $700 billion gets sent out from Washington to the 50 states using formulas that take into account how many people are in each state, counted in the census. And then all of you, whether you're an elected official or you run an organization or you're a community leader, you always look at data to make sure that you're making the right decisions. So if your data is wrong, your decisions may be flawed. And the fact is that not everybody has ever been counted equally in this country, even with the 14th Amendment. But when it comes down to it, the census really is about 2 things. It's about power, political representation, and it's about money. So while you may think it's a boring thing, let me tell you, it is one of the most important things this country does every 10 years. Let me give an example of what I mean by political power. This is what the country looked like after the 1950 census. You see that Indiana had 11 members of Congress after that last reapportionment. New York had 43 members of Congress. It was the big kahuna in the country with the largest delegation. California's catching up with 30 members of Congress. This is what the country looked like after the 2010 census. You see all these red and pink states lost congressional representation to the states in blue. One of the things that the states in blue all have in common is that their Hispanic population increased tremendously between 2000 and 2010. You see that most of the states that lost representation, lost voice in the U.S. House of Representatives were from the Northeast and the Midwest, except for one state, Louisiana. Louisiana lost a congressional seat, the only southern state to do so. Anybody want to guess why? Hurricane Katrina. So we've had already now Hurricane Harvey, Hurricane Irma, Hurricane Maria, Hurricane Florence. We still got a whole another hurricane season to go before 2020. Natural disasters displace populations, and population displacement means political power displacement. A lot of people moved from Louisiana to Texas, and with that movement went a congressional seat. You see, Indiana held on to 9 seats after this next reapportionment. Whether or not Indiana is going to keep 9 members of Congress or go down to 8 is going to depend on whether everybody in Indiana gets counted. Everybody. Money. This is just an example of some of the programs that rely on the census to distribute money. It's everything from health programs like Medicaid to education programs like the National School Lunch Program, Head Start, to basic infrastructure programs like highway planning and construction. All of this depends on people being counted. So for every person that doesn't get counted in our communities, that means we get that much less political voice and resources for the people who live there. So we have a lot at stake in 2020, which is why I'm evangelizing all over the country, encouraging people to make sure that they get ready for 2020. And one of the population groups that is most missed in the census are the people who can't make sure that they get counted themselves. That's our children. You know, there's a demographer in Maryland. His name is William O'Hare. Used to work for the Census Bureau, used to work for the Annie Casey Foundation. He did an analysis of the 2010 census called demographic analysis, where he took the data set and he compared it to actual births and deaths and documented migration patterns to figure out how accurate the 2010 census was. And when he was done, he gave me a call and he said, Arturo, I need to tell you that when I was done with this analysis, I was missing 1 million children, ages 0 to 4. And you need to know 40% of them were Hispanic children. And that's a 7.1% undercount rate of Latino children. This was a crisis. So ever since then, now we've been focused on how do we make sure our babies, our children, are all counted in 2020. And if it's children ages 0 to 4 that were missed in the census, think about this. Census is in 2020. That means these babies have started being born in 2016. And we have to make sure that they get counted. So 2020 is coming up really fast. And this is going to be a very, very different census than any census that we've had in our lifetimes. Part of the reason why is that the Census Bureau this time around wants to count us online. And it's going to be a digital census. It's going to be a high-tech census. Now, for a lot of reasons, this makes sense. Because we do so much of our lives online already, right? You all buy stuff on Amazon probably, stream Netflix. I don't know what that means, but I saw the Emmys. I had no idea what shows won because I don't watch Netflix or Amazon. But I do a lot of my life on the internet as well. So that makes sense. But we also know not everybody has access to the internet. Not everybody has access to technology. So while it may help in getting the census to be done more efficiently and cheaper is not necessarily a way to make it more accurate. So we've got to keep an eye on that. The Bureau wants to use administrative records to fill in the blanks. So when somebody does not return their census form in 2020, or they return it incomplete, before the Bureau hires somebody to go knock on that door and try to get information from that household about who lives there, they're going to go to another source first to try to get that information, whether it's the IRS, Social Security, Medicaid. They know, because we all know that the federal government knows a lot about us already. And so the Bureau wants to be smart about using administrative records. What we don't know yet is which administrative records will be used and for what purposes. From NALEO's perspective, we're a little concerned about this because some of those data sets may not be accurate or complete when it comes to the Hispanic population. So if you are, for example, an undocumented immigrant, you shouldn't have a Social Security number. So you're not going to be on the IRS database. So going to the IRS is not going to really help you make sure that you count everybody. And some of these data sets don't even collect information on race nor ethnicity, which is something that we want to make sure gets collected in the census. The Bureau is going to have only 248 offices in the entire country this time around, only 4 in Indiana. As of November 6th, these are the 4 cities that we're going to get a local census office. So Fort Wayne, you're on the list. Everybody else, except for Evansville, Indianapolis, and Lake County, you're on your own. So keep an eye on what the Census Bureau is doing and where they are, because they're shrinking their workforce in order to save money. The biggest thing, though, to remember is that the people at the Census Bureau are great people. You know, they're nerds. They're demographers. They're researchers. I've been working with them for over 30 years. Great, dedicated professionals. But they now are being asked to implement a census that they haven't been planning to do. They've started planning the census back in 2008. In fact, right now, they're already planning the 2030 census. But what they wanted to do in 2020 is not what they're going to be required to do. They're being forced to make some significant changes at the last minute that is really going to put the census at risk. And we all need to care about this because of what's at stake for our communities. First of all, Congress, they dropped the ball. Congress did not fully fund the Census Bureau back in 2015, 2016, 2017, and 2018, so that the Bureau didn't have the money it needed to prepare for 2020. As a consequence, the Bureau had to cancel or postpone or delay many of its preparations for 2020. As a result, the GAO has already declared the 2020 census a high risk for federal activity because it's not sure if the Bureau is going to be able to pull it off because they didn't have enough resources to prepare it. Rural communities are going to be very affected by the lack of funding that the Bureau has. And I know Indiana has many rural communities. Originally, the Census Bureau was going to plan to do an operation called Update Enumerate, where it hires enumerators to go out, update addresses, and then enumerate the people who live in that house then and there. But because of lack of funding and the need to reduce staff time, the Bureau will do something called Update Leave, which means they're going to hire the enumerators, update the address, and leave behind the census form. And cross your fingers that people are going to fill it out. And that's going to happen in all rural communities. Keep an eye on that as to whether or not everybody in the state is going to be counted. In years ending in 8, the Census Bureau always does a dress rehearsal. Those of you who are theater majors know that when you do a dress rehearsal, it's as if it's the real thing. Well, the Census Bureau wasn't able to do that this year because of lack of funding. Instead of a dress rehearsal, they did something called an end-to-end test, where they just wanted to test the computer systems. And instead of doing it in the 3 sites that they had planned to do, 2 rural sites, 1 urban site, they only did it in 1 urban site. And that was done in Providence County, Rhode Island. So the Bureau really doesn't really know how this is going to work, especially in a state like Indiana with a large rural community, because there was no final test in a rural environment. We need to pay attention to what's happening. And then the biggest issue that's affecting my community, our community, is that the Department of Commerce has ordered the Census Bureau to add a new question onto the questionnaire, asking everybody, are you a citizen, yes or no? Now, people will say, what's wrong with that? Why shouldn't the country know how many citizens it has? Well, the fact is the country does know how many citizens we have. The Census Bureau already asks the American public their citizenship in a survey called the American Community Survey. It's a survey done by the Census Bureau of 3.5 million households every year. It's a rolling survey. And one of the reasons it's on the community survey is that in 1950, the Census Bureau realized that asking people their citizenship was not getting them the best information because people were not willing to answer it. So they moved it from the census that's done every 10 years to the long form, that's a sample, to now the American Community Survey. And it's one question asked of about 50 questions. I don't know, has anybody here received that form? This is I see a hand. They ask everything, right? They ask you, do you have running water? How many bathrooms do you have? What's your commute time? How much money do you make? What's your level of education? Are you a citizen? That's the American Community Survey. But now that question is going to be on the decennial census. And I don't care your politics, your views right now, whether you're Democrat, Republican, or Independent, the fact is that right now in this country, immigrants in particular are very afraid of their government. And now the government is going to be asking everybody, are you a citizen? And we know what impact that is already having on our communities. People are going to be scared to fill that out. We're doing focus groups right now to try to figure out how do we explain the census to our community around the country and convey to people that the census is actually safe and confidential and that nobody's going to use your personal information against you. In fact, the Census Bureau only collects the information for statistical purposes. How do we explain that to people? Well, in focus groups that we've done in Texas and California and North Carolina, when we show them the census form with the citizenship question, you know the response we get? Yeah, right. I'm going to fill that out. And that's what people are saying all over the country right now. These are some of the issues that we're dealing with. But let me go. This is the actual citizenship question itself. Again, it appears benign and innocuous. But in this political environment, when we have conversations about a deportation force, separation of families on the border, a Muslim ban, the kind of rhetoric that we're hearing all over, adding this question is going to make the 2020 census really difficult for it to be a success. And all of us need to be involved, making sure that everybody gets counted because what's at stake. This is why there's so many lawsuits right now that are in federal court. There are 6 lawsuits challenging the citizenship question, 2 in New York, 2 in Maryland, 2 in California. All of these cases seem to be moving forward where judges are saying, you know, there's something suspicious going on here. The Secretary of Commerce testified before Congress under oath that the reason there was a citizenship question added was because the Department of Justice asked for it. In discovery, in litigation, it has come out that in fact he asked the Department of Justice to make the request. So there's something going on here. I'm not going to question motivations as to why the citizenship question has been added, but I know the impact. And that's to scare people away from being counted. And we got to not allow that to happen. So our current position right now, and people are asking me, what are you going to tell people about the citizenship question? Well, the fact is, I don't know, because the Census Bureau doesn't know. Remember, this was a last-minute addition. The Bureau has not asked the citizenship question of everybody in 70 years. So it doesn't know how it's going to treat forms that get returned with the information missing, because some people are saying, I'm just going to leave it blank. Well, we don't know if you leave it blank, is that going to trigger an enumerator visit? And one of the things we know is people don't want somebody knocking on their door right now, asking questions. So we don't know what to tell people yet until we know exactly, will there be a citizenship question, yes or no, once the litigation is all done? And what is the policy of the Census Bureau going to be? If you leave it blank, will the Census Bureau send out an enumerator? We don't know. Is it going to go to other administrative records? We don't yet know. Will it go to the USCIS, Department of State? We don't know, because the Bureau doesn't know. So it's something to keep an eye on over the next few months, because all this will have to be decided by April. Because by April, the Census Bureau actually needs to go to print, literally, to print millions and millions of census forms for the 2020 census. So we're testing messages to see how we talk to our people, as I mentioned. One of the things is that when you explain the census to people, people have good feelings about the census, except when you tell them, oh, and they're going to ask you if you're a citizen, yes or no. That's when a lot of fear and anxiety comes up. And you can see some of the comments we've gotten from our focus groups about people not feeling comfortable getting that information. We tested lots of messages, and what we've learned is that the most effective messages are if you explain to people how important the census is to your community. That school funding relies on the census. Health clinics funding relies on the census. If you don't get counted, you're only hurting your community. That resonates with Latinos much more than some of the other messages we tried to convey. Let me just move. Immigrants were especially responsive to this notion that the census was convenient, safe, and required. We try to test a resistance message, sort of something along the lines of the people who want to deport you or the people who don't want to count you. That didn't work. That was not an effective message, except for maybe some young people. So we're going to be gearing up our own campaign to explain to people how important the census is for your communities, for funding. And it's consistent with other research that we've done. And who says it is just as important as what is said. So people think, oh, we got to get athletes, right, to convince people to fill out their census form. We got to get, Lin-Manuel Miranda, right, because he's the big Broadway star. No. People trust teachers. People trust nurses. Who's going to be a nurse? People trust you. People trust people who care for children and families. Those are credible, effective messengers. And so for those of you in the room who have that background, we need you to be the credible messengers for the census and to convince everybody to participate. And we need to prepare now. 2020 is on the calendar, only a few months away, but the process has already started. And we at NALEO, we're going to do everything we can to do a national campaign using Spanish language television, Univision, Telemundo, and English language, because not every Latino speaks Spanish, to convince people to participate in the census, because it's so basic to our form of government, to our democracy, to the well-being of our communities. And as we sit here right now, thinking about the future and honoring these young people who are the future of this country, we got to think about everything else that we need to do to make sure that our country is ready for the future. And if we don't have accurate data on all of us, regardless of our citizenship, regardless of our ethnicity or our race, our age, if we don't have the right numbers, we're not going to have all the tools we need to succeed as a country. So this is the mission of NALEO right now. Get everybody counted. Should be something that all of you should be thinking about for Indiana, because Indiana has a lot at stake in the 2020 census. You celebrate your Latino population, fantastic. Let's make sure we count them, all of them, every single one. Thank you.